close to Rubicon. Wake the dog up.
Hey, it's me, it's the dog. I'm the dog, and I've been playing Armored Core 6 this weekend. I'm about 10 hours in, so I wanted to just give you kind of my thoughts, kind of a first impressions video, what I'm thinking about it so far. This is all coming from a place of I have never played an Armored Core game before, so that's kind of my perspective that I'm bringing into this. Well, that might be a lie. When I was like 6 years old, my parents rented a PS2 from a Blockbuster. You used to be able to do that. And there was some mech game that we rented, and I couldn't get past the first level. So that might have been an Armored Core game. I can't remember. But aside from that, I'm a fan of From Software, but because of the Souls series. I've been playing the Souls series for years, and that's really what got me into their games. So when I saw that they were stepping back into Armored Core as a series and releasing a new one, I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to just kind of come in and see what it's all about. So yeah, these are kind of my first impressions, sort of answering the question of like, if you have never played one of these games before, is this a good place to start? If you're a fan of the Souls series, will you enjoy this new Armored Core entry? So starting off just with like the gameplay, this game actually reminds me a lot of Sekiro. Not in that the combat is the same at all, it's completely different, but a lot of people had a tough time making the transition from the Souls series into Sekiro when it came out, because it was a totally different combat system. There were a lot of habits that people had developed over the years playing the Souls games, and those habits would get you killed very quickly in Sekiro. And so when that game came out, people had to learn this entirely new way of playing this game. And Armored Core 6 is very similar. You have to learn the game on its own terms, and you have to build some new habits. And it is really fun once you get it down, and once you break some of those old Souls habits and kind of get those expectations out of your mind and just approach the game kind of on its own merits and try and play it for what it is. It has some really, really deep customization, which I think that sort of gets to the difficulty of the game, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here. But I think that this game probably has deeper customization than any of the Souls games, certainly. I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface of what you can do with designing your AC, with its weapons and its generator and the FCS and all these other parts that you can add to it. And how you design your AC does determine a lot of the difficulty. It is a hard game if you don't learn from your mistakes, and if you don't do this. Like, if you're just kind of throwing yourself at a wall over and over again, expecting to get lucky with a boss, it's not going to work. So that's kind of, an important thing to know when you're approaching this game, is that it is very fun, it is challenging. You can make certain parts of it a whole lot easier if you just pay a little bit of attention to what's going on around you, paying attention to your surroundings, paying attention to what's flying at you on screen. Even things like the sound design is really important to pay attention to in this game, because there's so much happening in front of you at all times that sometimes you don't have enough time to see something and react to it. But the game gives you these really helpful little audio cues to help you react to stuff. Like when an enemy is launching a missile at you, there's a little noise that'll play. And if you pay attention to that noise, you can adapt to it. You can act when you hear it, whether that's dodging or getting up into the air to get away from it, or rushing down an enemy or something like that. So yeah, it is an incredibly fun game, and it's very addicting. I've really felt myself it's got its hooks in me, and that happened after I stopped trying to play it like a Souls game, and once I kind of adapted to this new style. The combat it's meaty, it's beefy, it's explosive, it's really fast paced. It feels unlike anything else that has sort of come before it, at least in the time that I've been playing these games. But it is a ton of fun. Change up your mech a lot. You're going to have tons of opportunities to buy new parts, to save new presets with your mech. They make it super easy. The UI and the design is very inviting. I never felt intimidated by all the different options that I had. It always felt very intuitive and kind of easy to compare, what I currently had on my AC versus new options that I could try. And I know in some of the older games that that process was more difficult, or maybe just more obtuse, harder to know, like, is this actually going to be an upgrade for my AC, or is this just going to be a total disaster? This game makes it very easy for you. It's very generous with the amount of money that it gives you to work around with your AC and to experiment with stuff. And if you buy something and you hate it, you can sell it back at 100% of the price. So it really encourages you to experiment with new things and to adapt, especially in these boss battles. The boss battles are enjoyable, but a couple of them in the first 2 chapters have felt maybe just like a touch overtuned. And the difficulty is a little bit uneven. I've heard some other reviewers say similar things, and I agree. There are some of these missions that you go on that are super easy. You can just breeze through them, not a problem at all. And then you come up against a boss battle, and I've spent hours on a couple of these bosses until I sort of learned what was going on and learned their weaknesses and was able to create a build that could get past some of their defenses and mitigate some of the aggressiveness. But yeah, so that's just one thing to know, is be ready for a challenge and be willing to adapt. Don't just try and go in with the same game plan over and over again. Switch things up. The story, I've seen some people ragging on the story a little bit, which I don't get, because I love the story. I love the atmosphere and the setting and the vibes. The voice acting is excellent. It's very expressive, really emotional. I found the storytelling to be sort of what I've come to expect and love from Software. They don't give you all the answers. There's not a whole lot of exposition. They just kind of drop you right into the action with this big cast of characters, and it's up to you to put the pieces together if you want to. You certainly don't have to. You can just be here for the big robots blowing each other up. But even if you just pay a little bit of attention to the comms, to the mission briefings, there's this really interesting story unfolding in it that I can see already, and some very, very interesting characters too. It feels a lot tighter than, something like Elden Ring, which, a big high fantasy, epic fantasy kind of story, of course, is going to have a different pace and a different set of themes that they're working with. But I was just so impressed to see that, the people at From Software can take this style of storytelling that they've honed over the years and apply it to something that feels like a pretty tightly scripted thriller instead of a big, expansive fantasy story. I've also found some of the story beats to be kind of weirdly funny and warm and touching at points too, and it feels very kind of feels very in the moment. There's themes of immigration and climate change, resource wars and extraction, all of these things that you just don't really have so much space to touch on in something like a Dark Souls or an Elden Ring story. Some of these more modern themes and modern issues that they're integrating into the story in a really cool way that I appreciate. Visually, the game's beautiful. I mean, obviously, you can see it on the screen here. I know that From Software kind of has their roots in the mecha genre, and so I'm not surprised at all that they excel at this type of visual design. But I was so impressed by how confident the game is. It does not feel like a series that has taken a 16-year hiatus. It feels like they've been cooking this thing forever. This game knows what it is. It knows what it wants to do. And that even comes down to the way it's presented visually. It's so cool to see them really just sort of excel in this type of genre. Everything just looks so cool. So, should you play Armored Core 6? If you've never played one before, but if you're a fan of From Software, if you're kind of in the same position as me, which I think is honestly a lot of people over the last few years, I think you should, but with some caveats. Be prepared for a challenge, and that's not necessarily because this game is harder than something like Elden Ring or Bloodborne. It's just because it's different, and you undoubtedly will have probably built up a lot of different habits over the course of playing these other games, and those habits are not going to translate, and you'll probably make it harder for yourself if you try to play it like a Souls game. So lean into the differences, right? Lean into the customization, lean into building a million different ACs and using them, whenever it feels like one can give you a little bit of an advantage in a certain type of situation. Like I said earlier, kind of my only gripe so far, and it's not even that much of a gripe, but my only kind of gripe would be that, yeah, the difficulty feels a little bit uneven. I would have liked some of the missions to be a little bit more challenging. I would have liked a few of the bosses to be maybe turned down a couple of notches. I get it. I get what they're trying to do with these bosses. They're teaching you things about the game, which is what they're so good at, right? These bosses are a checkpoint saying, if you have not learned this part of the game yet, we're not going to let you go forward. You have to learn something and apply it to this fight before you can move on to the rest of the game. Regardless, yeah, some of these boss battles, like the one you can see on the screen here, they're gonna take you to clown college, man. They're gonna take you out to the woodshed. Certainly, if you don't know what you're doing or if you're not learning from your mistakes. But with all that in mind, I would absolutely recommend this game to anybody who's a fan of From Software but has not played any of the previous Armored Core games. You are going to have a ton of fun with this if you just lean into it, accept it for what it is, try and take the game on its own terms. You're going to have a blast. I know I am, and I still have probably 2/3 of the game to go, so I'm very interested to see where the story goes and how everything develops.
A premonition of the storm of flame that will burn Rubicon.